And I find that very unfortunate because as a Philo-Semite, I love the Jews, I love the Arabs, I love all the Jewish people and the Arab people and the Palestinian people and the descendants of the Phoenicians in Lebanon and the Berbers and, the ancient Egyptians who were Hamito-Semitic tribe. I want love to win. I'm like Moses Hess. I don't want hate to triumph. And to me, the Brexit extreme right and extreme left is coming from a rhetoric of hate. We hate the EU because it's full of elitist Jews. We hate the banks because they're run by the Rothschilds. I just have to look on the websites of these kind of anti-EU people, and they're all hatred for the Rothschilds, hatred for the Jews. It's a conspiracy of the elites. And this, unfortunately, is a rhetoric that's there in the extreme right and it's there in the extreme left. And therefore, we have this dangerous situation in Parliament yesterday when those people that are voting with the Tories from a supposedly socialist or left-wing perspective are being influenced from that position. And there are people around or near to Corbyn, who have taken that view at some time. Corbyn is obviously someone that himself has been pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist, he would probably call himself. I don't know. I've not had that conversation with him. What I do know is that when there was a debate in Parliament a few months ago about anti-Semitism in British politics, an incredibly important debate, which was broadcast on the Parliament TV channel, Labour MP after Labour MP got up and said, look, I'm the Labour MP for Liverpool Central or whatever, a Jewish woman, British Jewish woman, and I get daily hate mail, emails, calling me a dirty-eared, accusing me of working for Mossad and I should go home to Israel. And death threats and stuff. And I was shocked. I listened to these MPs reading out from their personal diaries and logs the kind of things they were receiving. This anti-Semitic diatribe coming from extreme left members of the Labour Party. Coming from people that were saying, the Labour Party doesn't want you yids in it. Go home to Israel. It was shocking. And I was thinking, it's hard to believe that anyone... I used to myself be a member of the Labour Party years back in London in my 20s. I couldn't believe that anyone would want to be a member of the Labour Party with that kind of attitude. And yet they are. They've been allowed to get away with that. What I was shocked at is that Jeremy Corbyn sat on the front bench listening to all this. It went on for about 2 or 3 hours. And he didn't once speak. He kept his silence. And it was left to Diane Abbott to then sum up at the end. And she made, I think, a totally inadequate response from the front bench, saying, yes, we don't like racism of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitic or anti-black or anything. We're against racism. Which was a totally inadequate response to a very specific issue, which is that charge of being anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. All Corbyn needed to get up and say was, actually, folks, this is tragic. The Labour Party is a philo-Semitic party. We love all the Semitic peoples equally. We want a just settlement in Israel and Palestine. We're on the side of peace. We won't tolerate anti-Semitism of any kind, and that means being anti-Jewish or anti-Palestinian. We want equality and truth and love to prevail. Now, he doesn't have the intellectual gravitas to have been able to say that, apparently. I've written to him several times, he's never replied. And I used to teach at the school where he studied, Adams Grammar School in Shropshire, and he didn't do very well. He failed his A-levels. Come on. Can you just for a second think about that? How can you possibly get to be the leader of a major political party and you failed your A-levels? I think it's shocking, actually. I think it was he failed, or maybe he just struggled and got an F or very low grades. Anyway, I still think he has deep down a good heart, and I'm sure that if Corbyn had thought all this through, he would have done something about it a very long time ago. What's happened is that because of not talking about stopping this kind of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it's enabled the Jewish community in Britain to think, Labour's no longer speaking for me, I'm going to vote the Tory, I'm going to support the Tories. At least they're on our side. And And I think this has enabled a kind of right-wing shift in Jewish public opinion in Britain to think that they're the natural allies of the Conservative Party, which I don't think is true, actually. The Jewish intellectual, who's a fiercely individual operator, it shouldn't really be aligned to left or right movements or whatever. I prefer the Isaiah Berlins, who, if anything, you would call them a liberal. So that was one thing that struck me about the debates in Parliament. Why this hard left had failed to act in accord with, I think, the collective conscience of the British people and ensure that we don't have a hard Brexit. Well, because their own rhetoric of extremism is propelling them towards what I call disaster socialism. Deep down, they actually want the collapse of the EU. They want the collapse of the British state. They want Scotland to secede and Ireland to go back into a time of troubles because they think socialism will be built on that, the smoking rubble. And Marx himself had that view. Marx refused to participate in peace meetings because he said, no, it's only with war and violence that we'll get socialism. So socialism will come after the disaster. Now, I don't agree with Marx at all about that. In fact, I fundamentally disagree. I used to have great arguments with my mother in a friendly spirit because she was a Marxist and a communist. I disagreed with her. I said, no, violent revolution is not the way to get utopia. It's not the way to get the kingdom of God. And so I can't associate with the hard Brexit of the right or the hard Brexit of the left. I would say we need to really go back to the drawing book and start again on Brexit. We need a second referendum because the thing is an absolute disaster. We've seen what's happening. The trouble is, of course, the disaster capitalists on the right, the hard Brexit people, are happy with this. They're going to make fortunes as the British economy crashes. They'll buy it up for cheap, they'll invest, and they're already making lots of money from it. The hard left, the disaster socialists, they're going to benefit from it. They're very happy. They'll be roaming around the rubble of West London and capturing wealthy people's homes and having, Bolshevik little, revolutions all over the place. God knows, that's probably what they think. Speaking for a centrist position, what I would call a transpersonal centre, speaking from the heart, I would say that we need to redress this problem of this disaster approach with the energy that's the opposite of a disaster, which is revisiting this in a second referendum, thinking it through and voting for love this time. I've said before why I think the metaphysics of love is at the heart of the United Kingdom and at the heart of the European Union. Neither of them are perfect. No country's constitution is perfect. No political civil arrangement is perfect. We're imperfect creatures because we're in a difficult, complex world of matter. As Heidegger said, we're thrown into this world. But the solution isn't to blow it up and destroy it. It's to reform it through using logic and reason and, dare I say it, intellect. Okay, so now I want to share something else. One of the things we have in Britain is we have a monarchy. We're a royalist society, and we have a queen who seems to be quite an intelligent woman. Over the years, I've attended some events with her present, and I've met, not her to talk to, but I've been in her presence at a Commonwealth Interfaith Day observance in Westminster Abbey, which inspired me to create the Commonwealth Interfaith Forum, which I still run. I'm a Canadian as well as a British citizen. And I think faith is very important throughout the entire Commonwealth. We're 53 nations of very, very diverse religious beliefs. I've been, as you know, probably to India many times, have many Indian friends from the Jain, the Hindu, Zoroastrian. I met the rabbi from Delhi at an interfaith conference recently. There's a Jewish community in India. There's a strong Christian community associated with St. Thomas. And the strength of the Commonwealth is our common faith, if you want, the commonwealth or common faith that binds us. And I think the Queen takes that very seriously. I know she does. I think she must be very upset about what's going on about Brexit, because as an intelligent woman, she must realise that if Brexit goes ahead, Scotland is going to go for total independence. I mean, they might keep the Queen as a figurehead, but they're going to become totally separate from England and Wales. And she must also have realised, her advisors will have told her, that Ireland is going to go back into another time of troubles, or possibly, if a referendum can be organised, they'll just reunite as one country, the Republic, but outside the domain of the UK. Unfortunately, the probability is the Ulster so-called loyalists would take to the streets and fight rather than let that happen. Legally and constitutionally, under the Good Friday Agreement, there should be such a referendum, clearing the way for the reunification of Ireland. My fear is, and I'm sure it's the Queen, she met Martin McGuinness, she shook hands with the leaders of Sinn Féin who'd come round to a political route to solving the problems of Ireland. And she's, been an important figure in that process. She must be absolutely tearing her hair out, thinking, God, all that work about to go down the drain because of this Brexit nonsense. So I've been in correspondence with the Queen about this, and I'm going to share a few little insights. I wrote to the Queen back in June, I think it was, basically warning her. As an independent thinker, I'm not a member of the Privy Council, I have no outer power, I'm simply an intellectual, simply a philosopher, but I care passionately for the well-being of the British people, the UK, and I care passionately for peace in my country. I don't want to see fighting on the streets of Belfast. I don't want to see all the trauma that would arise out of the breaking up of the UK. So I told her all this, and she wrote back saying, through a secretary, a correspondence coordinator called, I've been asked to write and thank you for your letter of the 28th of June to the Queen, from which careful note has been taken of the views you express regarding the UK's departure from its membership of the European Union. Well, I thank you very much. I regard that as polite, and it's interesting. Careful note has been taken. Goes on to say, whilst it was interesting to know of your views, I must explain that as a constitutional sovereign, Her Majesty acts on the advice of her ministers and remains strictly non-political at all times. Well, okay, they had to put that in, and of course, technically speaking, it's true, but the definition of what is a constitutional monarch is something that's never actually been put down in writing. The Queen is entitled to a view on Brexit like any other person in the United Kingdom, and no doubt she does have a view. And I think it will be quite an influential view. And the way that the Queen operates is with a body of advisors called the Privy Council, which includes all the great and the good who've been important figures in British politics and also more broadly. And she meets with them from time to time, and they have discussions. It includes the First Ministers of Scotland, Wales, and the Prime Minister, and so on. Now, those discussions are never minuted. They're not made public. We don't know what's spoken about behind closed doors. But I'm beginning to think, if you read the runes, if you read behind the lines, that the Queen has come round to a position of, well, going to have to go with Brexit. It was the referendum result. And she's somehow been talked into holding the view that a second referendum is out of order and not even discussable. Now, I think that she's been misadvised. I think that is a false position, and I think the Privy Council itself has come to that view on erroneous grounds. I would go even further, and I would like to make an allegation at this point, and this is a public discourse I'm giving here. I actually got to the possible thinking that the Privy Council itself may have been infiltrated by intelligence agents, people in the employ of other countries outside the UK, who do not bear the best interests of the UK at heart. Now, this is quite a major allegation to be making, and on what basis do I make it? It's to me, it's a shocking possibility. But I can actually see no other explanation for the fact that the Privy Council seems to be going along with a strategy that is going to lead to the breakup of the UK. And there is some evidence that some of the things the Privy Council are now doing and saying are against the interests of the United Kingdom. And the only explanation I can come up with is that it has literally been hijacked or infiltrated by forces hostile to the best interests of the United Kingdom. And I think the Queen is therefore in a double bind. Enormous constitutional issues are raised by these allegations and concerns. Firstly, who on earth is doing the security checking of these so-called Privy Councillors? Who on earth is, you would have thought the British intelligence, which is so famous, James Bond and all that stuff, would at least be able to work out who is and who isn't loyal to the United Kingdom. Now, I don't know if there is a statute on the books that says that to be a member of the Privy Council, you have to not be an agent for another government. Like, I don't know, any country. I don't care, I'm Canadian. So look, even if you're a Canadian intelligence agent, which I'm not, you shouldn't be allowed to sit on the British Privy Council. Certainly not if you're in a country outside the Commonwealth. I don't know if there is such a law, but if not, there ought to be. And if I was an MP, I'd bring in immediately a private member's bill to that effect. Now you can say, oh, well, yes, but I'm an intelligence agent for a country that Britain's got great alliance with, No, sorry. There has to be a question of total loyalty to the sovereign and to the people and the country of the United Kingdom as a whole. There is also a question of is the Privy Council sworn to the person of the monarch as an individual or to the country and the people of the United Kingdom? There's a bit of an obscurity here because at the current wording, the current status quo of this setup, it looks to me as if you could sit on the Privy Council if you're loyal to the monarch, but you hate the British people, and really don't like the country. I think that needs to be cleared up, and it should be both. I don't think it's acceptable to make it a personal thing when it should be a collective thing. There's another possibility. I'm an intellectual. I'm speaking freely here under. The opposite of Chatham House rules. I'm speaking freely from the heart, in the court of the intellectuals of history, speaking the truth about a very important matter. What if the Queen has herself been hijacked and is being held to ransom by some foreign intelligence agents who are working against the well-being of the United Kingdom? But she's been manacled, her hands are strapped, she can't do anything about it. What if she's been threatened with all kinds of revelations in the media if she dares speak out against Brexit? What if some people have come to the Queen in private and said, Your Majesty, sorry, but Brexit's going to happen. No, you can't allow a second referendum because if you do, we'll do X, Y, Z. It looks to me as if something like that has happened. Some kind of fear has been used against the Queen and the Privy Council. And, well, what on earth could they possibly have? What kind of secret revelations could be made? I think one of them is the following, and I suspect this is partly what's been threatened here. And I'm talking about a book called The Queen Mother by Lady Colin Campbell, which tells the real story of Queen Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Bowes Lyon. Now, it's a fascinating book. I recommend it to everyone that's interested in history and our history as a country. What it turns out is that the Queen Mother, we all remember the Queen Mother as an ancient lady. She lived to be over 100, I think. And a bon vivant, great woman, and obviously influenced the Queen a great deal. This author, Lady Colin Campbell, has done some amazing research on the history of the Queen Mother and discovered that she was almost certainly illegitimate and not actually a descendant of her mother at all. and that Lady Glamis, who was supposedly her mother, was actually effectively her fake or paper mother. The evidence that she points to, and this is, I think, really fascinating, is that in fact the Queen Mother's real mother was a French servant on the estate at Glamis Castle called Marguerite Rodière. And that Marguerite Rodière, the mother, the real mother, Lady Glamis, couldn't have children anymore. And her husband, Lord Glamis, asked this French cook, "Do you mind having my baby? And then we'll pass it off as my wife's." And she agreed, apparently. This was back in the days when such things, were acceptable to a certain aristocracy in the United Kingdom and elsewhere around the world. It is fairly common in certain traditions, and the text reveals, for instance, Abraham did the same with Hagar, and powerful, important people do these kind of things, and it's not a problem for them unless they get found out. Is it possible? I mean, I'm assuming this is true. The evidence that I've seen as a historian looks as if it's pretty true. But of course it's been totally hushed up. The media never talk about this. It's never in the papers, it's never on television, there's been nothing on the BBC. Yes, there's been a book, but the book has died a death. Nobody ever reviews it, it's never talked about. So, is it possible that somebody has gone to the Queen and said, "Look, Queen, we know you're illegitimate. Not only that, your line is from a French illegitimate stock. So if you come out supporting the EU, we're gonna expose you. We're going to basically get you the sack because you'll come out as sort of fanatic, and you'll be out. You're in fact possibly your entire dynasty will go. It could even be the end of the monarchy, because this would be such a scandal. Descendant of French cook supports the EU. You'll be sacked within a few days you can just see the headlines in the Times and the Murdoch press and elsewhere. The Queen would, be forced out of office in disgrace. So maybe somebody's gone to her. Maybe Murdoch sent one of his lieutenants and said, "Look, Queenie, if you rock the boat over this Brexit thing, we're going to destroy you." Now, if that's true, then I think that's very sad. I think that, truth is, I don't think the fact that the Queen's grandmother might have been illegitimate, the Queen's mother might have been illegitimate, has any actual constitutional or political significance. It doesn't make the Queen herself illegitimate. She's still the legitimate monarch of the United Kingdom. If anything, it just makes her a bit more human. We can relate to her a bit better, because at the moment she's on a kind of pedestal of invulnerability. And I think she should have showed more courage, if this is one of the leverage things that's been used against her. She should just say, well, go on, do your worst, we know, our people know a few things about you, Mr. Murdoch, and etc., etc. So, anyway, I just raised this, and I think that courage is very important. So I've recently rewritten to the Queen, and I'm writing I'm writing as the head of state. I'm writing to her as the head of state in response to her letter back to me, and I'm sharing this with the public. I'm sharing this because this is a public matter. This is a constitutional matter of great importance, and I'm writing as the coordinator of the World Intellectual Forum, as the director of the Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy, and also as an Archdruid. I'm the British and European coordinator of Druids to Peace, which is a very ancient tradition that the Druids historically have kept Britain and Ireland together in peace. And I've been trying to fulfil that role in this lifetime as much as I can. I don't want to see all that work gone to waste. And those people that know me will know about my passion for Druidry and peacemaking. So I'm going to share, I'm not going to read word for word the letter, because that's a private matter and I've sent it to the Queen. I haven't yet had her reply. But I'm going to summarise something of what I've said. I say thank you very much for your letter of August, and things have moved on a bit since then. And I note that the Prime Minister is still insisting on forcing through Brexit against the wishes of the majority of the people of Britain. Because if you look at the maths of the referendum in 2016, the majority did not vote for Brexit, certainly not for a hard Brexit that's turning out to be a self-inflicted disaster. I point out to her, in her letter, she says there's nothing she can do. She's simply a constitutional monarch who's bound to follow the instructions of the leader of the largest party in the House of Commons, etc. But I say, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's strictly true. We're all duty bound by our own consciousness and our own conscience. And we have loyalties to the cosmic codes of honour, duty and truth, and divine law, as have been all previous generations of human beings who've ever walked on the earth. In other words, we have an inbuilt sense of right and wrong and fairness. I was recently interviewed for a job in the British school in Cairo, and I was asked, what are British values? And we discussed it, and I said, look, a sense of fair play. When I was educated in Britain, I was brought up to believe that you tell the truth, you act honourably, you act non-violently whenever possible, and you stick to the rules. If you're playing cricket, you own up if the guy behind caught you and you're a batsman, etc. It was just taken for granted. Fair play, that's part of the British innate constitutional spiritual nature. And so I'm just, the Queen knows this. And I say, therefore, that all monarchs who've ever ruled are also duty-bound, therefore, to uphold the spiritual law in the light of which they themselves are anointed and rule. And in her case, the spiritual laws of Christianity, which are based on love. And I'd point out that she's always saying this in her Christmas addresses every year. She talks about, love will bring us together. Even now she's made a speech in Scotland, love will heal wounds. But it has to be love coupled with intelligence and wisdom. And that is, the point here. So there are monarchs in other cultures. There's monarchs in the Buddhist tradition, the Shinto tradition, in the Islamic tradition, and there are other kinds of monarchs, Catholic monarchs, Protestant, and so on. They all have to operate within the spiritual laws of the constitution of the country they work within. And in our case, the fundamental idea is the spiritual laws of Christianity based on love. Now, I go on and explain, look, to permit a Prime Minister to willfully implement a policy which is causing massive suffering to the people of the UK and people outside the UK and Europe, many British citizens like me who live in Europe have chosen to live here, many Europeans who live in the UK, it's imposing huge suffering, huge angst, huge insecurity. How can that be a Christian thing to be doing? How can someone who's the head of the Christian church in my country be tolerating such a thing? What about the fact that it's going to lead to the withdrawal of Scotland and break up the kingdom? And that will cause huge grief. The only people that will enjoy that are the lawyers, who will have to decide where the oil pipelines can be split, who gets which bit of the MOD land in Scotland, where to put the nuclear submarines that are in Argyll, near where my Castle of the Muses used to be. That's just jobs for lawyers for years to come. Ordinary people will suffer. How can that be part of the Christian spiritual duties of a monarch, to allow that kind of angst to happen? What about the intelligence services of Britain, many of whom are Scottish people? Are they going to, who are they going to side with when Scotland goes independent? Are they going to rejoin the Scottish Independent Intelligence Agency? Are they going to stick with the, English-Welsh one? Are they going to be spying on each other within a few years? Who's going to be tapping whose email? Who's going to get GCHQ? Are they going to split a third of it off and fly it up to Scotland? Because by rights they ought to. What about Scotland Yard? The headquarters of the Metropolitan Police. Can the Scots get some of that? Because they've been pouring their brains and intelligence into British policing for the whole country. What about the honour system? You won't become a member of the MBE anymore. You won't get an MBE or an OBE because Great Britain as such won't exist anymore. Great Britain is Scotland, England and Wales and Northern Ireland. It'll be Little Britain. So it'll be we'll have to rename all the honours system, etc., etc. These are all huge issues they don't seem to have thought about that's going to happen when Scotland leaves. And one thing I do think that was shocking about the debates in Parliament yesterday was the complete ignorance shown to the SNP MPs who spoke passionately and intelligently, saying, we don't want Brexit. We in Scotland didn't vote for it. We reject it. And yet here you are imposing it on us. And their amendment, which was, I think, a very intelligent amendment, asking for Article 50 to be extended and so on, was simply just ignored by the vast majority of English MPs, either Labour or Tory. Nobody supported them. And I think that's shocking. And the Scots, one of the MPs said, look, you can say goodbye, Scotland's going. So what I'm saying to the Queen is, she has a duty as the head of state to realise this emergency is a serious emergency. Otherwise, what's the point of having someone at her pay grade? The reason we have a monarch is so that they can act in times of national emergency, surely. Otherwise, it's completely like window dressing. I do believe that a constitutional monarchy is a good system, but it has to have a way of kicking into action when the ship is about to go down. The Titanic is about to hit the iceberg. The ship of state is going to be broken in two, like Titanic. I'm signalling by this correspondence and my public address, I'm signalling a message up to the captain on the bridge saying, change course, iceberg ahead. So I go on, I'm not going to share all the details, but I say that in ancient times, and this is true, you see the monarchs of the planet, were always taken from the kshatriyas, the warriors, and Elizabeth is descended from a great line of ancient warriors going back to William the Conqueror ultimately, and one of my ancestors, de la Ferne, was probably in William the Conqueror's army in 1066. But beyond the warrior class and the monarch class, there's the druid or the seer or the rishi or the sage. And I'm writing also to the monarch on behalf of the Druid Council of Britain and the Druid Council of Europe, and I'm saying, look, we're all of us under cosmic law here. You may be a king, a queen, you may be a pauper or a peasant, but ultimately we all come before the throne of the absolute. We're all under judgment here and how we act. And therefore, those of us that have a duty to protect and preserve the realm as a monarch have an even more important responsibility to make sure they get it right. And so I'm just saying that giving her a few options on a bit of advice from a non-Privy Council member who's therefore able to speak the truth. Right, so that's a little glimpse into my correspondence with Her Majesty, and I hope I'm, no doubt breaking all kinds of protocol, but this is an emergency, and sometimes Archdruids have to break protocol in order to get through to appropriate people. I want to come up to another question, which is transpersonal psychology and psychoanalysis. My PhD was in the transpersonal history of ideas and the resistance to change, resistance to insight. I've come up with this idea of Sophiophobia. People are afraid of too much wisdom. We all are.